Okay, well, why don't we get things underway? Um, Let me say, first of all, I couldn't think of a better subject for a discussion, especially at this time of year, than market opportunities, new business opportunities for companies in the field of advanced manufacturing. Uh, Needless to say, over the past few years, it's been one heck of a journey for just about everybody in advanced manufacturing in Canada, and many companies have gone through this experience and are in pretty good shape today, but a huge amount of change. Not only the pandemic, but supply chain disruptions along the way. Now, a major war in Ukraine that's upsetting commodity markets. It's upsetting supply of important components, materials for the world economy. And so, in Cornell University, they've come up with a new term. It's called VUCA, and it means a highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and actually forget what the A stands for. It's not abstract, but it's something along those lines. But it really kind of encapsulates what many companies are facing today. But of course, lots of challenge, lots of risk. But with every risk comes new market opportunities to step in as suppliers in new areas of business, opportunities to, especially for Canadian companies, to step in as exporters, as suppliers to new customers around the world in new areas of innovative products, to support innovative services. So lots of opportunity here too. And I'm really glad today that we've got a group of experts who can speak not only from the point of view of business, but also from the point of view of a couple of agencies that are so important in delivering the fantastic export and export financing services that Canadian companies have available to them. I'd especially like to thank EDC. EDC is our sponsor for today's session. EDC is a gem. It's one of those agencies that not only see themselves as providing service, but see themselves as a partner for Canadian exporters, and is so important in terms of providing not only risk insurance, but helping provide financial services and working as a partner with Canadian exporters to allow them to get into and help customers buy their products internationally. So thank you so much, EDC. And from EDC, we've got Mike Brown joining us on our discussion today. Mike is the Commercial Account Director for Export Development Canada. We've also got Kurt De Vries, who's Canada's Trade Commissioner covering the automotive sector. And Kurt's led autonomous, connected, electric shared lines of business in the automotive sector, and has worked pretty extensively in that sector, and is supporting trade commissioners around the world in focusing on this particular area of innovation and opportunity for Canadian companies. Kurt is a trade commissioner, and this is another gem in terms of the federal government's support for Canadian companies doing business around the world. I've worked with trade commissioners for more than 30 years, and really every time, the feedback from Canadian exporters is so positive in terms of the invaluable service that the trade commissioners provide, and being able to identify opportunities, but also working with companies to make sure that they are able to enter the market, export markets, in a way that makes sense for their particular customers that they're focusing on. So Kurt, thank you very much for joining us. And then from the industry point of view, joined by Luigi Desario. Luigi is the R&D manager for Axiom Group. And Axiom specializes in engineering and automotive plastic parts and assemblies. Luigi's worked on several special projects, including vehicle lightweighting, EV systems, and composite materials. Can kind of bring the perspective from the company that is at the cutting edge of innovation in many senses in Canada's automotive sector, but also one very interested and very successful in developing international markets. And Barry Hunt. Barry is president and CEO of Prescient X. He's also the president of Canadian Association of PPE Manufacturers. We've been working with Barry over the past couple of years, supporting a number of his projects, developing disinfecting robots, developing new types of manufacturing processes for PPE, real leader in helping companies across the country bring new medical devices, PPE, to market internationally as well as here in Canada. But Barry's got a long history of working in the medical device sector, including the design, development, implementation of new products and processes and services in this sector, and does a lot of that business internationally. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and really look forward to this discussion. Hope it's not all about risk and all the challenges out there, but focusing on many of the new opportunities that are arising internationally as well. So, Sean, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And thank you very much again to our panelists for joining us here today. And for those of you who have signed in, again, thank you for joining us. For those who couldn't join us, we are recording today's session, just so you're aware, and we will share those recordings with those who couldn't make it. Also, we're going to have a section, if you will, a period of time at the end of the conversation for any Q&A. If you do have questions as we go, you can feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring those, and we'll make sure we ask those of our panelists as we complete the panel discussion here. So that's probably going to be top of the hour. So with that said, wanted to jump into the first question, and I thought, Luigi, I would start this question with you, so I'll read it off if you want to unmute yourself, and then we'll go from there. So the first question, and again, we'll have Luigi start. What are some new growth markets for Canadian manufacturers, based on your experience that you're aware of, Luigi?
Hey, thanks, Sean. Yeah, the new growth markets, and thank you, Jason, for the introduction. He mentioned some of them in there, and I've worked on a few of those things. The EV market seems to be a very big one, electric vehicles, and also this industry 4.0 data-driven AI-based technology. It's not necessarily a market, but an avenue of exploration for people to increase efficiency and production in their plant. And it seems like the industry is moving in this direction, and in automotive, with the high volumes that we deal with, we've seemed to be moving in that direction as well. And I think some of the other interesting growth markets are in nanomaterials and 3D printing, and of course robotics, which tie into all of those things combined, right? And maybe there's a little bit of a misconception about AI and robotics, that there's going to be the Terminators walking around, but I think in manufacturing, it's a completely different look. You're investing in technologies that are going to help you produce more with higher quality, and better timing. So I think those are some of the interesting spaces. I think that Barry can probably touch upon the other growth areas, obviously in the health and PPE and things that have happened during the pandemic that came about almost, you would say, in a revolutionary way, where all these other things that I'm mentioning are a little more evolutionary in our industry.
Yeah, thanks, Luigi.
Yeah, Barry, please.
I'll maybe pick up on that. So on the medical front, on the pandemic front, there's a lot of growth area potential. Building sciences, for one. So safe indoor air is what we need going forward, of course, and obviously in the PPE area. There's kind of a general theme here as we get older here in this country and around the world as people age. We're really looking for comfort and convenience, so we have to consider that in our PPE. The stuff that's been designed and manufactured in the past has not been very comfortable, has not been very easy to breathe through, and so here in Canada we have really taken the bull by the horns to make things comfortable and easy breathing and easy to work with. And I think that's a big part of our export strategy. they say you can build a business, quality, price, service. Pick any two and you can build a business. And I think Canada's brand really is quality and service. And I would kind of combine those to say the innovation and inventiveness of Canada is a combination of that quality and service. And that's really what we want to export. Better products that work better, more comfortable, et cetera.
That's great, Barry. Thank you. So I'm going to take this question and adjust it a little wee bit for Kurt and Mike, just based on their experience, because it's really across a number of different sectors in both cases. So Kurt, I'll start with you if that's okay, and then we'll move to Mike, and it'll be the same question for you, Mike. So what I would say is here's the scenario. I'm a manufacturer in Canada, and I want to enter some new growth markets, and I've got some capabilities and maybe the capability to invest. What are some of those high potential growth markets that are there right now for the waiting that I should consider entering? And maybe think of this from the perspective of different kinds of manufacturers that may want to enter some of these different markets.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. I mean, it's a broad question, but I'll take my sector perspective and kind of boil it down to more specific. So, like, yeah, electric vehicles are going to be a thing. Like, they're starting. It's just the beginning of it. There seems to be, at least in Europe and in North America, like a regulatory embracing of this, and the OEMs and the new entrant manufacturers get it, and they're going for it. The Asian market, they feel it's inevitable, and they're moving towards it. So this is something that we assume to be, we can assume, or maybe perhaps we can assume for this conversation to be a midterm to long-term trend. So we're thinking lightweighting, any sort of way to lightweight, any way to take wires out of the vehicle, any innovations. So we're talking innovation again here. It's just, how can you as a manufacturer use your innovation, your engineering, your expertise on building lines into the future supply chain of the electric vehicle. So I see a lot of opportunities in carbon lightweighting type manufacturing. I see aluminum, depending on the price. Aluminum has become an area of interest. So what I do in my work, like I work amongst all the traditional manufacturers, but I would say the last 5 years has been like a boom of interest coming from global OEMs looking at this ecosystem for innovative ideas and how to translate these innovative ideas into the product, be it the vehicle, into the enterprise, the business environment, or into the production floor. So I see a lot of manufacturers here are really excellent. There's 120 years of history of excellence, and they're very good at building out lines. And a lot of Europeans and Asian prospects, they don't know that. So that's part of my job. I take them in and show them around. But I see a lot of cutting edge Canadian manufacturers that have IP in their production. And that's something to consider too. It might not be what you make, it's how you make it. Because carbon fiber is something that's been around for a while. It's just, how do you do it at scale? Like, how can you do it at high volumes? These are the key questions that automakers are looking to jurisdictions like Canada and its manufacturing base for answers. So those are kind of starting points. Like specific ones, I was trying to be specific for the audience, but broadly, to kind of go broad again, find out the demand, make a contact base. You can talk to people like me or our network or EDC or yourself. It just like right now, what I see in the automotive is the traditional players have become open books. They've been very proud for 100 and something years, some of them, very internal, but they realize that they can't do it all internally, and they have to look outside of their own box. And they're very, very open to sharing their problem statements, what their challenges are. And so what I would recommend to manufacturers is do your research, find contacts, find out what are the problems of manufacturing, and you might have a solution, and then you're going to do well. And then you'll get into making whatever widgets or pieces of the vehicle at high volume. But knowing the problem first is I would say it's half the battle. Mike, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Kurt. And I agree with what you're saying. I think I'm going to try and pull it back further from automotive, but I think it comes down to knowing where the opportunities exist for what you're selling and what the physical limitations are. So if you're a company that is engaged in selling large pieces of equipment, capital intensive, then your new growth markets are probably going to be a bit more north-south than traveling over the ocean. Right now, it's tough to get a shipping container. It's tough to pay that freight charge. You're better if you're working in a locale that is closer to your own home base. So I think I'm seeing more companies going north-south right now in more traditional heavy manufacturing type industries. Similarly, if you start looking into areas of more portable, smaller size technology offerings in manufacturing, then we're seeing more of companies leveraging free trade agreements and maybe looking to Europe or starting to look more at Asia because the product can move a bit more and there's more openness to exploring these other markets where there might be less, either actual less real competition or less perceived competition from other companies. Stepping aside from changing countries, there is also certain merit considering diversification within your existing country base. Does your technology have a different application, a different use case? EDC's done a lot of work working with companies who have a use case for their product that might be intended for heavy metal manufacturing, but maybe if it's an IoT type technology, it could actually be transformed in a way that could make it suitable for food production lines or things like that. So maybe minimal investment in the product can create a whole new line of revenue. So we've seen a lot of that happening. So both geographic and industrial diversification. But I think what's really mattered is as companies are looking at this diversity is how they're positioning themselves. Ultimately, leadership of a company controls where you look, but they have to know how to sell into that new market. To the earlier comment, you can have it cheap, you can have it good, or you can have it fast. So they have to know which of the values are going to matter most for each target industry and make sure that they fit with the needs of the industry. I think navigating that matrix of things is what's going to make a company successful looking at new opportunities.
I want to add something, Mike, if you don't mind. Another trend I'm seeing, especially out of Europe, is clean, making it clean. And this is, it's been jargon for a long time, but now there's a regulatory framework that creates a credit or value to being clean. And a lot of the European prospects that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years have been looking for ways to validate and verify whether or not something from a supply chain is compliant with all the ESG type standards that their governments put on them. And a lot of this is coming out of the regrettable Volkswagen diesel scandal. They turfed a lot of the board. I met a lot of the new leadership in my journey as a trade commissioner, and they're very sincere. This is a real thing. This is not going to go away. We're behind as a North American jurisdiction, these regulations. And I would say the Asian markets are kind of just looking and watching and waiting for opportunities. They don't really demand it. But the European leaders, they demand this. And they look at the Tesla model of cashing in on carbon offsets as a very real and futuristic revenue stream. So as a supply base, if one wants to tie in with them, one must validate and verify that they're doing the clean thing. That's going to give more value to their customer. So the margins may be thin on the traditional currency exchange, but if you're looking at carbon exchange, there could be some very big margins. I've seen a lot of proposals out, and it's something for manufacturers to consider as being a real thing in the next 10 to 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. So I guess it sounds like almost no matter where you look, there are lots of opportunities. The key is either recognizing maybe North American opportunities first, maybe even within Canada first, different use cases, as you suggested, Mike, but then looking at your existing use case north-south, like and before maybe going overseas, just because of some of the supply chain constraints that may exist. But that's still an opportunity, obviously, depending on what you're manufacturing. So the next question then was really around what are the key steps for a manufacturer who wants to enter some of these growth markets? And along those lines, if you look at some of these key steps, what risks might exist? Barry, you okay with starting us off?
Sure, yeah. So whenever you're going to go into a new market, you've got to really understand, I think, the old market, and because that legacy market is powerful. So when you're trying to introduce a new product or a new service or a new process, change is hard, and so you've got to understand all the barriers to change first, and then you have to understand all of your competition, which includes all of your competitors who are involved in a legacy industry. So people who want to stay on petrochemical versus solar or wind, or people who want to stay with gas-powered cars instead of EVs, et cetera. You've got to understand all those dynamics, and not only do you have to understand the competition, you have to look around then and find collaborators, people to work with on R&D and introduction to the market, and find the real champions to support, because those early adopters and influencers make all the difference in whether you're going to be successful or not. They say in change, you know, the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, it's really it's like a 10 80 and 10. It's 10% of people are champions and 10% of people are dedicated to keeping things the way that they were, and the 80% are waiting to see who's going to win at each end of the spectrum. You have to be one of the winners, at, you know, one of the leaders, so you have to be seen as a leader. And to introduce something new, from my perspective, it has to basically meet 3 parameters: safe, fun, and cool. If it's safe, fun, and cool, it's something that's sustainable. It's something that people will buy again. It's something that will build a brand, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, clean, yes, all these other things. But if it's not cool, kids won't buy it. If it's a public thing, if it's a retail thing, it's got to be cool. And fun, that's, I guess, for the older generation, but it definitely has to be safe. And then on the risk side, no matter how much you plan for introduction of a new product or a new anything, it's going to cost you twice as much as what you think to introduce that, to develop that. So, and maybe another 10% on top. And same thing with what's your target date for launching that new product. It's going to be twice as long as what you think, and maybe another 10%. It's it never rolls out the way that you think it does. So those are the big risks. I think you're going to be undercapitalized. No matter how much you pre-plan, you have to have some kind of a contingency for it.
Great. Thanks, Barry. So I'm going to go with this same question. What are the key steps to entering these growth markets, and or what are the risks? Luigi, any thoughts on that based on your experience from some of the products that you've been investigating?
Yeah, absolutely. And to Barry's point about the 10% wanting to keep things the same, and listening back to Kurt and Mike, when you add clean technologies, sustainable technologies to existing things like petrochemical, they could become new or can be perceived as new as well. Again, and you know, things that are legacy, yes, they're legacy, but they're already here. So sometimes adaptation and infrastructure on existing infrastructure works just as well as introducing something new, which usually costs a lot more money, right? So that's one way to mitigate those risks, because there's always going to be risks, like Barry said, especially from the monetary side. And the things that we're speaking to here, a lot of them are very, very costly activities, you know, these big manufacturing things, but even these nanotechnologies, development of nanotechnologies. So one of the things I think that the industry could look at is, and do more of, I believe, is prototyping, rapid prototyping, and 3D printing. And this concept's been around for quite a while in advanced manufacturing, and maybe hasn't hit, you know, the pinnacle that it could be at, or the usefulness. So that's a very interesting thing. And being in R&D, you know, before we ever build mass manufacturing tools or anything, we always have to prove concept. And the usual way to do that is by prototyping, you know, as small as and efficiently as possible, and moving forward in that direction. So that was the perspective that I thought of when I was listening to this discussion. And this is very interesting for advanced manufacturers, because like the panel was discussing earlier, even though there's a lot of uncertainty right now, it's a strange time. Feels like there's a lot of opportunity as well, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, Luigi. Mike, any thoughts to add on the key steps to entering growth markets and the risks that manufacturers should be aware of?
Well, you know, at EDC, we love to talk about risk. So plenty of thoughts on this. The thing that came to mind first when I saw the question was that my general experience has been a lot of companies under-prepare for entering a new market. Companies tend to think that what worked in Canada or the US will work just as well in a different market. And they maybe don't have as good an eye on the regulatory environment as they maybe need to. So for example, there's plenty of stories of companies in the food space where they didn't pay attention to local packaging laws and had to throw out their first batch of product because it couldn't be put on the shelf because it didn't conform to local regulations for nutritional information or something of the sake. So there's definitely a role for making sure you're leveraging the right professional services firms or advisors to make sure you're not glossing over such regulatory risks. Another thing that it surprises me with my credit background is companies are not always conscious of who they're doing business with in some of these markets. And it's often been a conversation of, for example, who are you selling to? Oh, I'm selling to GM in Mexico. Well, GM in Mexico is legally different than GM in Michigan. So it's a different credit risk. It actually matters when it comes to your bank. It's a different company. And even within countries, if you're dealing with a new offshoot arm of a multinational, these are sophisticated companies. They are setting up bankruptcy remote subsidiaries for a reason. That company has a problem, that they can shut it down without having to worry about the rest of their operations. And I think people sometimes get tied up in looking at the name and not thinking about the full implications of who they're actually doing business with. And the last thing, it's a dangerous line to tread on for companies entering a new market, is to be careful not to bite off more than you can chew. It takes time to develop a market from scratch, especially if you're going with the big step of investing in a local market, setting up production, trying to gear to local demand. Many of us are old enough to remember the Hyundai Pony. When Hyundai first came to North America, it didn't go very well. And it took them leaving and coming back basically 20 years later to make it work. So you only get one chance for first impression, and it applies to companies entering new markets as well.
Yeah, that's great. I almost forgot about the Hyundai Pony, but it's been a while since I've seen one, that's for sure. Kurt, any thoughts on the steps to entering growth markets that you would share?
Yeah, I think it's been well discussed. But just to throw a pitch in for our services, I mean that's what we're here for, is to help you understand what you don't know what you don't know, right? And to help you understand these things, or at least be aware that there might be different risks involved than you might see, given your perspective of being a Canadian-based business. So that's where we come in for a lot of these conversations. And it depends really on whether or not you just want to export directly or try a investment entry, like Mike was saying as well. I mean, those are two very different things, and a lot of complexities to both, for that matter. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I think we did a pretty good job at hammering that one out.
Yeah, great. No, that's good. And our goal here today is to help those who are joining us, who are considering joining, or entering a new market. What should they be considering? What are the steps to take? So that was really good. So here's the next question, kind of along the lines of preparing to and beginning to enter a new market. So the question is this: what information is valuable? We've talked a lot about capturing information, knowing the market you're going into, knowing the regulatory environment. What information is valuable and can assist in making informed decisions about growth? Mike, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Happily. So it's really a broad question, because every company is going to have a different set of needs. But the best thing you can do is be open with the people you trust and your networks you trust. So I've spoken with many companies over the years who have gotten great value out of local chambers of commerce, CEO clubs, groups like NGen or other associations who have plenty of people willing to share their time and experience. Beyond that, obviously the Trade Commissioner Service, as Kurt mentioned, is a great partner for such things. And EDC has been doing a lot of work in the last 5-6 years, investing in this area ourselves. We've done a comprehensive revamp of our website to provide free information to companies on things such as exporter frequently asked questions, country business guides, ways of entering new markets, and other resources of that nature. So it really is about the pre-work, putting in the time, talking to people. And last but not least, in my opinion, is also including in that your professional services. Talk with your accountant, auditor, and talk with your banker. Your banker, I know some people have feelings over the pandemic. Their bankers might not have always felt they were there for their success, but coming out of this, bankers want to work with their clients and see them grow. You talk with a bank early on, you'll be able to find out how the bank can support you in this new market, or if that new market poses risks to your existing operations. And the bank can help you come up with a strategy or a local partner institution in the other market that helps you succeed. They aren't there to punish you, they're there to help you succeed. I think that's a really important message.
That's great. Yeah, because ultimately the bank's success is your success, right? So, so I'll move that same question over to Luigi. from your experience, Luigi, what information is valuable and can assist in making good, solid decisions when you're entering new markets?
Yeah, well, the points that Mike was hitting on are perfect. I mean, you have to talk to EDC, and your lender is very, very important. And I feel like a lot of Canadian banks, there's a mixed understanding of, whether they even have an interest in doing global investments. You have to talk to them and understand that. And they might be more conservative or more, hey, we're just, doing real estate here locally, and basically, and then people are looking to, get their local bank to finance some big projects. So lenders are very, very important. And like he alluded to, the just local chambers and NGen as well, and things like that. But also when you're doing your own research, I mean, StatsCan just uploaded a huge COVID-19 pandemic data set, and there's a lot of information there. And I like to go on Canada buy sell thing and just look at what is out there and what the government is buying, because it gives you an idea of, what's going to happen in the future, right? If the government is buying something up, you're like, well, they must be preparing for something, or they have an understanding of the trends and things that you might not see as well. So I like to use, seems like a basic resource, but StatsCan and Canada buy sell are very powerful ones. And then other simple things as well, speaking about just following trends, like listening to, wait, what is Elon Musk doing? What is Tesla doing? Because at the end of the day, with our experience anyway, Tesla and a lot of the OEMs, and maybe Kurt can speak to this, they seem like they want to be manufacturing closer to their plants now. And, this is going to lead into obviously sustainable things where, hey, I'm an EV company and I'm bringing in parts from all over North America on, diesel trucks or things like that. They don't want to do that. And going forward, there might be more of a need to be closer to the assembly plants that you're dealing with, especially in long-term relationships like the automotive ones. So I don't know if Kurt has any insight on that aspect of it, but those are the things that I would kind of touch on.
Yeah, I think you nailed the trends. Like, I would say, know what your customer is doing, know what they're thinking. Again, know their pain points, know what they think are threats or risks. And then, position yourself as a solution provider, but it also preps you to get ready. If they're going to pull out of a market and you're going into the market to chase them, a bad idea, right? Like, just understand what their thinking is and their approach to market. And yeah, there's a big trend towards, you can call it onshoring, you can call it friendshoring. This is something that, this current administration in the US is very big on, and we're very big. We've always have been. We kind of got thrown out of the tent the last administration and had to fight to get our way back in, but we're in a different regime now. So friendshoring is the big one, right? International security is a big element to decision making now in businesses that 10 years ago was a free trade, global trade, group hug mentality, right? Like, it was, no, we'll never go back to those days. Well, history kind of suggests we have cycles of globalism and then regionalism and continentalism, or whatever you want to say. So, we got to keep in mind as businesses that this is probably going to happen. It's going to be beyond our control. And, we have to feed into it or become irrelevant. And I had another point I wanted to throw in about, key steps to entering growth markets and risks. Know where your customer is, get your anchor customer. But some government programs do exist to support. And in our side, we have something called Can Export that can help you offset some of your risks for these markets as well. So I kind of wanted to get that last plug in before we got too far in our questionings here. But we do actually put our money where our mouth is, and we'll fund some interesting ideas and proposals that the private sector will put on the table. So I thought that would be good for our audience to know before we kind of forget about it there, Sean.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm thinking before we wrap up and go into Q&A, maybe give yourself and Mike another chance to talk about any resources available that those attending today or manufacturers can access. So appreciate that. Barry, any thoughts on the information that's valuable and can assist in making informed decisions about growth?
Well, sure. I mean, there's the obvious, what's the market size, who are the players, et cetera. But understanding the actual procurement path that's going to work, whether it's a new one or whether it's an old one, because it's not always as straightforward as what you think. You can have the best mousetrap in the world or the best price, the best service, best whatever, but you might not get the order. And it was really interesting when Kurt mentioned friend shoring, because friends crop up everywhere. So understanding the connections in an industry, where the friends are, whether it's connections in multinational companies with governments, or whether it's with the procurement agent you're trying to work with has got a cousin or whatever. People buy from their friends. And so it's important for our government, of course, to be friends with other, nations that we can sell to. But the politics run deep everywhere. And it's not just government politics, there's corporate politics, and it's everywhere. And we have to understand all those nuances on the procurement path just as much as we understand our product and our market and our specs, performance requirements, etc. We have to understand that procurement path, I think. So that market intelligence is important to know.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Barry. So the next question then, what relationships, we talked about information, we talked about opportunities, talked about information. Now, what relationships can be helpful in fueling international growth and helping you move along that path? Kurt, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to be maybe a little confident here and say us. We can be your first stop, and there's quite a few of us. Like, I'm part of our domestic network, and actually, my esteemed colleague Greg Rust is kind of our expert on NGen in our team in Toronto. We have about 40 some odd trade commissioners, and we're all organized in the sectors. And so my job is to run around in our territory here in Canada and get to know my sector inside out, from the guy who thinks he has the next best backup mirror and meet him at Tim Hortons, to talking with the senior innovative executives at GM Canada. So my portfolio is pretty wide. I get to know everybody. And then my counterparts, in my case, it's Germany, it's Japan, it's the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, it's Detroit, Korea to some extent, Monterrey, Mexico, the Southeast. I talk with my colleagues all the time. Like, we get very close and we exchange a lot. And I can tell you that, getting to know someone like myself or my colleague Greg Rust or my other colleagues, depending on what your ultimate sales sector is, that could exponentially increase your network, because it's not just us. Like, I'm just the face of the network. There's a lot of depth behind myself, and that depth has additional depth because they know the local chambers of commerce. They might know senior executives at your next customer, right? And if you're relevant, we'll do that intro. If you're not relevant, we'll play the role as a gatekeeper and say, well, they're not looking for apples, they're buying oranges. So I'm sorry about that, but maybe you should start considering to sell these apples, right? So that's where we can have these conversations. And then, when the time is right, and I put my air quotes up because we have to see, how ready you are, or how ready the client is to actually pull off their plan, then we start to unleash our Rolodex of contacts and intelligence and play that role as a counselor to you. And so that's how we work. So I would say happy to be the first stop. That's just not myself or my colleagues. There's a whole huge network that's existed for about 126 years in 160 something places around the world, at your fingertips, so to speak, if the plan is right and the case makes sense.
That's great. Thanks, Kurt. Mike, do you want to be the next here? What relationships can help in fueling international growth from your perspective?
Yeah, and I think Kurt has a great point. The Trade Commissioner Service is a great starting point, and leveraging their CAN export program he mentioned is a key step. A lot of companies help defray the market entry costs. Beyond that, it does kind of chunk down depending on what line of business you're in. So I mentioned food companies earlier. As an example, I know some food companies that when they are on vacation, they will just walk through a local grocery store and look to see what's popular, what's in the premier locations on the shelves. So in-person market scouting, be it grocery store, be it something more like a trade show, it's invaluable to get experience seeing what people are actually buying, what needs exist. Sometimes you can only identify those by being there. Beyond that, there's also the opportunity of following your existing customers. If you are a strategic supplier to a customer, maybe bring those conversations up a notch with your customer and say, how can I better support you in your next market? And that kind of comes with an embedded market entry strategy. And similar but different to that is if you identify a market gap, but it's bigger than your own capabilities, finding a partner who can go with you. So if you make half of a widget and somebody else makes the other half, maybe you can come up with some kind of a business arrangement that lets you combine your forces and go into a new market that way. So again, you have to have identified the gap, but if you can bring another partner along with you, then you're going in with a complete solution instead of going there and kind of waiting for the business to arrive. So it really does depend on what line of business you're in, but I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. And again, I think talking to the right people is critical in this process.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And just remind those of you joining us, if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A panel. We'll be getting to those very soon here. We're moving into our last question here. So same question then for yourself, Luigi, from your perspective, your experience, what relationships can be helpful in fueling that international growth if you want to enter new markets?
Well, yeah, absolutely what Kurt and Mike were touching on. I mean, they're government agencies. One of the things that we do here, I'm being an R&D manager, every time we have an idea or there's an innovation, we scout the government websites and call all of our contacts and say, are there any programs available for, this topic or this area or this market? And, or working with your local, representatives and they might know and or your local chambers. But the first step we always take is always to look for programs that exist, because as Kurt said, they know other things and people that we just wouldn't know being on this end of it. We have the ideas, we have the innovations, we have the, the proposals, but we don't necessarily have the contacts or know which direction to go in. And like Mike was saying before, we don't necessarily know the regulations. So they might say, well, you have a great idea that you want to hit the market with, but honestly, you can't hit that market with that because it's just not allowed or the regulatory environment won't allow it. So definitely, networking with people in industry, but people in associations, we have, being automotive, you have the APNA and things like that, that really help you understand, and not necessarily because it's difficult to go out and speak with your competitors and things. A lot of people in the industry do know each other and they do speak to each other, and when they do casually run into each other and things like that, but you don't necessarily go to them and ask, hey, what are you working on right now, right? Because they have their relationships with their customers. And I think what Mike said was very important, especially in our industry in automotive, is you got to know what your customers are doing and what they want, right? We don't necessarily sell directly to the public. And yes, it's important to know what the public is interested in. Like Barry was saying before, if something's not cool and not in trend, it doesn't matter if you have a great idea, it might not sell, right? So that's important as well. So, but definitely the contacts in the industry and going to your government representatives, government agencies. I don't know if Kurt knows what that website is, but I think Canada now has a website where you can track through saying what your needs are, and it will tell you what programs that you may be eligible for. So I can't remember what the site is off by heart, but it's there, and I don't know if we can make it available to the people after if we find it, but it's a very interesting process to go through before you start.
Yeah, we, just quick response to that. We do. It's not our department, Global Affairs Canada. I think it's Innovation, Science, Economic Development Canada. We call it ISED as a kind of acronym, but I believe that is the portal you're talking about. And if you punch in, your profile, they ask you prompting questions, and then ultimately you end up with a shortened list of programs. And I'm just over 5 years working in government, and I was surprised within the first year as how many programs there are to offset risk, to kind of fill in this gap we have between seed money and pension money. We have this gap, and there's a lot of things that we have available in terms of programming to help companies grow from, the hardworking startup where, it might be a small family business that wants to become that next 500 employee company. So there's a lot out there, and it could be very confusing, to say the least. So good comment on that one, Luigi.
Yeah. Thanks, Kurt and Luigi. Appreciate that. So Barry, for you then, same question. From your experience, what relationships can be useful when it comes to international growth?
Well, I think all relationships, and I know that sounds a little bit, hokey, but it's quite true. So if you look at the Canadian economy, about 90% of Canadians work for small and medium enterprises, SMEs. 99% of our GDP is from SMEs, and 98% of our exports are from SMEs. Well, SMEs have to work together with other SMEs, with government, with everybody to fill in gaps. And simultaneously, when you collaborate with other people, you've got expertise in one area and expertise in another area, and you put two experts together from two different areas and you fill in the gaps between the silos, that's where 90% of innovation occurs. And innovation really drives our growth here at home and for exports. And so when I say everybody, I mean everybody. But fairly new to me is understanding how important it is for industry to collaborate with government and vice versa. And years and years and years of going to ISO meetings all over the world, I've seen how different countries have worked together, industries and government. And I look at a country like Sweden, for example, and they punch way above their weight in exports, but they also punch above their weight in setting international standards, and they punch above their weight in government support for their industries to help write those standards. It's quite incredible, and it's very effective. And then when it comes to the collaboration side, I can see, in my one field of PPE, for example, I'm involved with a company that developed a whole new process for non-woven textiles, for melt-blown polypropylene, developed for PPE initially, but now can be repurposed for separators and batteries for EVs. With this new, you never know what's going to come of a new process when you have things working together. Another example is the pathogen detection coming from the food industry here in Canada, then repurposed for COVID detection in these Lucira kits, an RT lamp technology, and they can be repurposed again for building technologies, for sensing pathogens in air, et cetera. So that spin-off effect of that initial collaboration, when you take one expert from one area and another expert from another, and working together, it's incredible. So all relationships, I guess, would be the answer for fueling growth.
So, and let me take a kind of ask a follow-on question to that, Barry, and you can start, or anybody else in the panel can jump in. So if I had a product that I'm producing, we've talked a lot about understanding different use cases and through collaboration, identifying different ways this product might be used. Collaboration is the tool to get there, but how do I drive that collaboration? Who could I reach out to, for example, or what could I attend where I might be able to connect with people who I could have these kind of conversations with to say, we produce A, and they could say, have you ever thought of taking A and using it in B? What kind of environment would that look like, and what could a manufacturer do to put themselves in that environment?
Well, I think sharing your level of expertise, one of the things in the NGen program, for example, is identifying your intellectual property and what you'd be willing to share and collaborate. So scanning through those documents to see who's doing what, and trying to, find, and just pick up the phone and call someone. The contact information is there. I think that's key.
Anybody else want to add to that from your own experiences? How to find those collaborations where other folks can help you identify where you could create new use cases for your product or service? Nobody?
It's a really tough one. I've had, just like Gary kind of said, there's the ability just when you're having conversation, and it becomes almost a what if. What if you were to take that technology and adapt it for X industry? How would that happen? What do you think? And it just prompts that thought that gets it going. But I don't think there's necessarily a magic bullet that starts that process. It can just be a random conversation with somebody you've never met before, or it could be a trusted advisor who's sharing an insight.
Like, I can answer only through my sector is the automotive sector has recently opened up. The traditional OEMs have opened up scouting platforms where they'll take in proposals from startups, scale-ups, doesn't matter, from anybody. As long as they have a strong automotive use case, like the key ingredients to success, strong automotive use case, the ability to survive a very rigorous due diligence and They'll earn paid proof of concepts, but being open-minded enough to change, to co-develop the product with the customer, ultimately is the patience to do that is a key ingredient, and the ability to survive a 3 to 7 year conversation on the journey to becoming, spec'd into the next generation production. So they're out there. A lot of them have been looking at software, some hardware innovations, anything again like nano, carbon fiber, lightweighting, ESG compliant. I mean, I'm kind of using buzzwords there, but those are the areas of interest. They exist in all the markets, nearly so, and they do public calls. So all you need to do is, if you know your sector, you can find it. Really, just that's it. That's a specific case regarding auto. Other sectors I'm not too sure about, but I likely will have a trade commissioner colleague who would know in much more greater detail than myself.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
Sean, I've found a lot of success in going to NRC and specifically to NRC IRAP advisors and to universities that we do research with, and just asking the question, who do you know that could do this, or who do you know that could do that, or here's what I'm looking for, or here's what I could really use. And through their networks, they've been really good at finding people to collaborate with.
It's great. Thanks, Barry. So it's really about being open about what you are, getting out there, sharing what you are working on, and networking with folks. Could be from trusted advisors to other peers in the industry, using associations like, as you mentioned, Barry, NGen has different directories and groups you could join where you could identify others' IP that could be complementary as well. So lots of sources of these collaborations to find different use cases for your product or service. I want to make sure we jump into some of these questions. We've got more time left, but I know sometimes people tend to move to another meeting. So I want to make sure we capture these before we go too far. So there was a first question, and I'm going to open these up. So first to jump in, feel free to answer this, and if I don't get somebody jumping in quick, I'll volunteer somebody. But here's the first one. In the Canadian context, are interprovincial trade barriers a big constraint for manufacturers to sell their products outside of their province?
I think, and I feel bad saying it time and time again, it depends on what you're selling. There is often a challenge with supporting across the span of the country. So if you're selling a big piece of industrial equipment from Ontario, if you're selling it to the BC interior or to Newfoundland, how are you going to provide local on-site support and service? What are you going to do to support your customers when things come up? That is often a big challenge. In terms of interprovincial trade barriers, I don't profess to be an expert. It's not an export by our definition, but I do know in certain industries, there are requirements for products to be made, food being an example, especially, for example, in breweries. Product has to be made locally or else it can't be brought across borders. So there are definitely some barriers, but I think from a manufacturing side, it's more availability of timely, quality on-site support.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Kurt, anything to add to that at all from your perspective?
Not much, really. I think you named it, Mike. It depends on what you're selling. There's there's a component of the Canadian economy that's fairly regulated. There's sectors that are fairly regulated, and then there's other ones that are fairly deregulated, and each of them has provincial perspectives. So really, I don't have much more to say other than, if the question was maybe about auto parts, I would say there's likely nothing in the way. But if it were alcohol or spirits, there probably are a lot of hoops and regulations to overcome to hit a market next door to us in the same country. So I don't really have much more to say on it than that.
Okay, appreciate that. And Barry, Luigi, jump in if I was going to go to the next question, but if you want to jump in on that one, feel free.
I was just going to say that as far as provincial trade barriers, I don't find many of those in most sectors. There is a little bit still in the building sciences because the building codes are administered provincially, but I think the National Building Code has done a good job of allowing alternatives, to come forward. But I do find there's a lot of provincial favoritism in procurement when it comes to government stuff, hospital stuff, medical stuff, etc. So not so much a trade barrier as
preferences.
Yes, a little.
Yeah.
Finger on the scale.
Yeah.
Well, and an extension of that becomes things such as engineering or other professional services often are also, there are borders for that as well, or barriers.
Yeah. All right. So the next question that we have here is from Mr. Folds. So he asks, and I'm not sure if anybody can speak to this, but he asks for the panel to comment on the scope of opportunities around the hydrogen supply network. Anybody here feel comfortable speaking to that?
I'm gonna take a stab at it because, yeah, there's a big debate in the sector, right? In my sector, auto, is it hydrogen fuel cell? Is it battery electric? It's likely both, to be honest. So yes, big opportunities. Yes, there are multi millions of dollars to build these refueling stations, transit stations. The technology needed is tightly held. If you're looking at partners, you're looking at Japan and Korea. They're all in on hydrogen. They think that the battery electric people to think that they can take on North America are out to lunch. You know, they'll say it very frankly, given our range that we have to deal with and the current technology of batteries. The battery people, on the other hand, say, no, this is really clean. And the next generation, they have faith in the next generation of battery technology will overcome this, 500 miles per battery situation we have now and move us into 2000. So that's, yeah, like, it's interesting. I'm in these debates a lot. I work with Germans and I work with Japanese and I work with Koreans and I work with people from the Bay Area that are betting or investing in all of them. So I can tell you that, yes, there'll likely be hydrogen fueling stations and infrastructure all across the country. Yes, there will be charging stations, and yes, they'll be very, very costly to build, and there'll be many new things to make, and there'll be many opportunities.
And I think to add to what Kurt's saying, it does create a bit of a bifurcation in the auto space as well, because to run a hydrogen engine, you still need an engine. Whereas if you're running an EV, you don't need an engine with combustion features. So it's going to create a bit of, I think, a proxy or a bit of a battle, frankly, between parts of the supply chain when it comes to propulsion technology. I know there's been lots of talk as well about how clean is hydrogen if it's hydrogen derived from natural gas, as an example, blue versus green hydrogen. There's also the lingering thoughts of driving around in a bomb, not giving that any credence or not, but just saying that some people are apprehensive about driving around with pressurized hydrogen in their vehicle. So I think it's still a sector with a lot of room for growth. I think we've seen more interest in it in mass transit than in personal use, in my opinion. And I think there's still a lot of good technology out there, and I think very much like Kurt, I think it'll end up being part of the future. We're just not there yet.
Okay. Yeah, Sean, I would say that I think we're really going to see the hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells in rail, trucking, and mass transit. And I really think you're going to be primarily EV in the consumer space. And I think that's going to be the separation. The practicality of EV in rail or trucking is just not there. And there are clean sources of hydrogen. We have Bruce Nuclear looking for a place to part company with a lot of hydrogen because they have a ready source of hydrogen from their process. I don't see that as being the issue. It's the logistics of rolling it out for just one or two industries is going to be tough here for Canada, but I think there's definitely a market for it in the future.
Okay, thanks, Barry. So Barry, along that, there was actually a question that came in just for you. So we'll get to that here right now if you're up for it. So it's this question for Barry. Are there any collaborations between government and industry in other jurisdictions that you've found particularly impressive or effective that should be a consideration to Canadian governments?
Well, yes, I go back to that Sweden example. It's not just Sweden. Korea is well supported. China is well supported. Japan's well supported. Germany is well supported, where government is funding people from industry to write international standards for products. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is all of the ISO standards that are out there for products are basically there for the purposes of trade. The charter on ISO in 1947 was to facilitate international trade. Here in Canada, we look at our standards a little bit different, a little bit more naively, I guess, because we'll have a number of doctors on medical committees, for example, and it's all about patient safety. And we keep losing sight of how important to our homegrown domestic industry those standards can be for our manufacturers. And we consistently lose that. So I have a lot of admiration for the countries who do support industry as far as helping pay for all those weeks abroad to write all of the standards, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very key, and I would love to see that change here in Canada. I think that would be a tremendous difference.
Okay, great, thanks. Luigi, and any comments on any of these discussions that are happening that you'd like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking, we spoke about the vehicles and the personal transportation versus the rail and the mass transit, but also there could be, from my understanding and people I've spoken to, opportunities in other fuel cell and cell technologies related to actual buildings and infrastructures and generators and things like that. There's a lot of hybrid technologies coming out that, right now the costs are very high, so it will only be a few companies. But my understanding is, from some of the contacts I have in the green sectors and the energy sectors, and they used to promote, oh, we're going to put the panels on your roof and those things, and of course those wouldn't make sense unless you had a government rebate to make it make sense, right? But the costs that are coming down in those technologies, things like power walls, Tesla power walls and things like this. And my understanding is that when it comes to the fuel cells, and I'm not professing to understand the technology, but the hydrogen fuel cells and other fuel cell technologies, things that convert even natural gas into massive power sources on localized generators, are going to become things in the future. It's going to start on bigger, massive manufacturing plants, people that can afford that infrastructure. But as the costs come down and as Canadian businesses are able to add solutions to that, and there's going to be a lot of auxiliary products and technology that are going to be associated with that kind of energy storage at a local level, or local production of energy, or having these big cell boxes. And one of my understanding is that those big shipping containers, some of those shipping containers have been converted into generators with technology inside of them, and people are just parking them in their parking lots and using them as backup power. But as those technologies become better and better, people will start migrating to those things as well. So it's not just going to be in vehicles, it will be actually in factories as well.
Yeah, and that's a good, there was a follow-on, Kurt, just before you say this, there was a follow-on question, which was, transport is only a small part of hydrogen. What about green steel, green cement, hydrogen for export? So that was a good point. So go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, well, I think we as Canadians in the citizenry, and as well as as enterprise, have to get our heads around that carbon is going to be a cost, and you're going to be able to trade it and sell it and buy it. And it, whether it's hydrogen or whatever form of technology, whatever form factor green technology emerges as in the next 20, 30, 40 years, like that is a key part of the calculus. So when you're looking at Lafarge, big cement producer, they're going to be, French-based MNE, right? Or I guess it's Wholesome Lafarge, they merged a few years ago. So anyway, still European-based. They can't offshore their dirty behavior anymore. It has to be validated. If it's not validated, they're going to be taxed. They're on their carbon. If they don't clean it up, they're going to be taxed. Or they have to move to another jurisdiction outside of Europe to move all their head office or somewhere far away where they'll accept that. But the corporates, especially Europe, is ahead of us on this, if you consider that the future, right? And you consider that North America will follow in line. But it appears that that's what we're trying to do as a society. But this is key factor in this, very key factor. And hydrogen, yeah, it could come, it can come in combustion form, as Mike said, but it also comes as a fuel cell, where you just have essentially a hydrogen generation system that essentially charges a mini battery that runs an electric motor on your car. So like you have so many variations now in mobility that in powertrain that you have to be mindful of that. Whereas you were just selling internal combustion engine components before, I'll tell you, all the tier ones are looking for new things to make if they're tied in on trannies. I'll tell you that right now. They're looking for new things, medical devices, farm equipment, other stuff that is related to the metal forming and machining they have done. And some of them are just getting out of it altogether and trying to find new ways to create IP and to protect it for the long haul, because combustion engine has been the center of IP, really, for these OEMs, and now it's going to be irrelevant. So electric motors are pretty darn easy to make, so that's not really a valid source of IP. So you think about their positions from an IP perspective, your customers, they're going to be whittling away. So how can you contribute to the formation of new IP? Well, battery chemistry, lightweighting, new techniques, new forms of production. So yeah, there's a lot of changes coming, I think. I don't really, like, from my contacts internationally, very few of them sense that there's going to be a U-turn. People are going to say, no, we're not going to charge for carbon anymore. Like, they feel that it's an economic necessity that somebody has to pay for this. Like, there is a cost to it. So and they're going to start with the big manufacturers first, and then they're going to send it down the supply chain. So if you can contribute to that as a supplier, and you get your head around that and your strategy in place now, you're going to be ahead of your competitors. So again, it might not be the cheapest, and it might not have the best quality, or maybe it would, I guess, because part of the quality is going to be considered clean. It's going to be part of the quality matrix. That's it. And then you're going to help your customer save money in their home jurisdiction, and you're going to be part of the supply chain. That's what's happening. A lot of the scouting I deal with, that's their calculation ultimately, is we have to rejig our supply chain and make sure it's clean, because if it's not, we're going to be paying. The end. There you go.
Just to add quickly on that, I won't profess to be an expert in all things hydrogen, so my commentary was around the automotive sector because I know that best. But with respect to green steel, that is obviously a very big trend. I understand hydrogen can obviously be a fuel source to help replace the gas fire or coal fire in the traditional steelmaking process. On the cement side, what I have heard more talk about myself lately has been cement as a carbon capture, as opposed to how hydrogen would be deployed in that area. So I do not know if they are complementary technologies or not, but most of the discussion I have heard has been around cement for carbon capture. But if Jeff, I believe if you are interested in hydrogen, I do have a colleague at EDC who is doing more work in that space, and he might have some more insights for you.
Great, thanks, Mike. So there's another question here that came in the chat that I'll read out, and it's, I'm thinking, Barry, this would be a good one to start you off with, but we'll see here. So here's the question. I haven't heard anybody talking about med tech, so I'm wondering if the med tech sector is considered a growth market. I'm thinking that small companies supplying the automotive or aeronautic industry could diversify and supply the med tech sector as well, especially during off-peak periods, because those sectors are cyclic. The pros are that they already have a good quality management system in place in order to get the required certification of ISO 13485.
Well, medtech is very difficult on the procurement side. And so just switching in and out of medtech as a supplier is going to be very, very difficult. Yes, you can make the products, but the actual procurement chains, it's either very technical and clinical product that needs a lot of evaluation committees, et cetera, to go through, or it's a commodity product which has long-term procurement contracts in place. So most of medtech in Canada, there'd be 1,200 line items on a 7-year procurement cycle for commodities, and the other stuff is, it's just a very difficult clinical evaluation process that you're going to go through. So it's not something you just jump in and out of, unless you have a pandemic and suddenly you need a bunch of ventilators and you need some help. It's very rare that that ever happens.
Just to add a quick bit to that, there has been a release in the last, I believe, 12 months or so. The government formed the BETTER team, excuse me, Business, Economic and Trade Recovery team. It's a cross-government organization panel of institutions that is dedicated to focusing on certain key strategic sectors, one of which is medtech. So it's definitely seen as a growth industry, but like Barry said, there is a lot of complicating factors in the procurement process. But like in most industries, I firmly believe that if you come up with a new innovative product, that the cream rises to the top and you will find a market. It is then just the challenges of selling into the right part of that market. If you are somebody who's going to sell direct, for example, to consumer, direct to hospital, or you have to be integrated, are you at the build phase of a hospital versus being able to be retrofit? There's a lot of different factors that weigh in, but it is definitely a priority for the government and the various financial crowns and agencies.
Great. All right, so before we go into closing comments, which I'm going to give you all a chance to make some closing comments, and then as well, when you do so, just share with our attendees, if you're comfortable with them reaching out to you, how might they connect with you? And to Kurt's earlier point, if there's programs you think they should look into, sharing those. So before I go into that closing comments and kind of, connection points for yourself, any other thoughts around some of the conversations we've had today, other than closing comments that anybody wanted to share? Okay. All right. So moving into closing comments. And again, if you could just share kind of your final thoughts on this topic around international growth that we've talked about here today. And then of course, if anybody wants to connect with you or if you do have an organization, an agency, et cetera, how might they do so? And if you're aware of any resources, throw those in as well. Kurt, are you okay starting us off there?
I think so. Yeah, I think I pretty much summed up the best way to, from our perspective, what some of the touch points are in market, what sort of network you need to develop. We're all here together, EDC. We have private sector mentors on this call. I think it's been well described. Just to get a hold of us, the best way is, well, maybe we can put something in the chat, but we do have a Twitter account. And that's a good way to kind of hear about all our public facing events or initiatives. We do a lot of public open calls for things that might be of relevance to you. That's one way to do it. You can set up a My TCS account where you describe your business and your sector, and you'll get more targeted messaging to your emails. A lot of the best work that we do is confidential. I can't talk with a senior executive from BMW and go to a market and tweet and LinkedIn post all their problems, because it just wouldn't get me very far in the relationship. But what I could do is meet these people with my colleagues in Germany and obtain the problem statements, what their pain points are, and then confidentially go out to my network and start to work it a bit. And so that's where you might be best advised, is if you think that you are ready for this journey and that you want to expand your market, you're committed, you got all the pieces in place, and you want to take that plunge, meet somebody like me or meet myself if you're interested in auto, and we'll start the conversation. And then you get on our radar. And then when these things come up, we can quickly connect the dots. So yeah, happy to be a point of contact to triage, and happy to get to know anybody who wants to shoot me an email or give me a call after this conversation.
Okay, thanks, Kurt. And if you want to go into chat and put in your email or domain, whatever you're comfortable with, that would be great. Luigi, any closing comments from yourself that you want to share with those today? And if somebody wanted to reach out and connect with you, how would they best do so?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was a great discussion, and I think it's great because it's in the spirit of Canadian business, and what Kurt said about reaching out to him and him opening channels to other people. I feel like since we started doing that as a company, I think a lot of companies are scared to do that. But ever since we started doing it as a company, hey, reach out to business advisors in Ontario, reach out to regional business advisors, reach out to, people in the industry. And I think that the people in the Canadian industry are very open to working with each other, and they don't feel like, they're competing against each other. I feel like that we all want to succeed together as a country and as a community. And that's probably the best way going forward. And that's why this panel is a good example of how that would occur as well. And, I have had nothing but great experiences working with people in industry and even government agencies. Sometimes they get their end of the negative talk, but at the end of the day, they're all here to help us succeed, and they want to see us succeed. And just to, it was something that Barry was talking about, which was interesting, and working with other people, how there was a PP product, I think he was discussing, that ended up being used in another application. This happens to us all the time. And a lot of times in our industry, people don't get worried about, oh, you developed that thing. As long as you're not selling it to one of our competitors or whatever, we're like, yeah, you want to sell it in a different industry, go ahead, that's fine. So I think it's not to be scared to work with people and think, oh, you know, we need NDAs and this, because, you know, everyone's very busy doing their own things and they don't have time to, you know, hijack someone's great idea. They, you know, they want to work on their own ideas. And if someone else has a great idea, they probably will be more than open to helping them. But other than that, it's, you know, don't be scared to be open and network, because nothing but positive things happens when you do that.
Yeah, great, good, well said, Luigi. Appreciate that. Barry, any closing comments? And if somebody wanted to connect with you, how would they best do so? Oh, you're muted there, Barry. Oh, your muting's not working. Oh, okay, all right. Well, if you want to put your contact information, Barry, in the chat, that'll work. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you for closing comments. And I know you already put your contact information if anybody wants to reach out to you directly.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sean. No, and what I really encourage people is this conversation today was the first part of a conversation. What is happening is always changing. Stay in touch with the people on this call. Stay in touch with your peers and other centers of influence. It'll only do you favors going forward. One piece of intelligence I like to leave with people as we talk about EDC. I've tried to avoid being pitchy at all, but if you are thinking that you are not relevant for EDC because you only sell within Canada, that might not be the case. EDC helps companies engaged in export supply chains, not just pure exporters. So it might be worth having a conversation for companies in that vein. But beyond that, it's been a great pleasure talking with everybody. I think there's been a lot of good, useful information shared. And I want to thank you, Sean, for your hard work in pulling this all together.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike. And thanks to everybody as our panelists. Obviously, thanks to everybody who joined us and stuck around. Really appreciate that. What we will do is we'll be sending out a copy of this recording to everybody who joined us and who could not join us. We'll also include the contact information you see here in that email, so you'll be able to reach out directly if you'd like. And with that, I want to thank everybody again for joining us here today on behalf of NGen Canada. Thanks to our panelists for committing your time to helping Canadian manufacturers, and wish everybody a safe and great rest of the day and a great summer ahead. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.